Welcome, everybody, to another episode of the Big Sky Now Basketball Podcast presented by Corwood Motors. I'm your host, Josh Amick, with my co-host, as always, John Allen. We got a lot to talk about today on the Big Sky Podcast. Not only do we have a lot of great action for the tournament on the men's and women's side, but also a lot of coaching changes, a lot of transfer portal news, and the transfer portal just opened up, so we're assuming that a lot more names are going to be added to that going on. But let's kick it off with some of the coaching changes news. If you haven't heard, probably the biggest news over the weekend as far as changes go was Sacramento State hiring Mike Bibby, the NBA Arizona legend, and a lot of different opinions on this, if it was a good move or not. I know we kind of spoke off camera, John, but now that we're here with the listeners ready to hear what we have to say, what is your thoughts on Mike Bibby getting hired for Sacramento State?
Yeah, I think it's a surprising one. I follow a few pages on there. Shirley Donovan on Twitter. He's, saying that this one was kind of out of left field in his mind, but it kind of got some people kind of chuckling when he said it initially. But when you look into it, Sacramento State, the link is there and everything for Bibby to come back. I don't see what coaching experience he has besides just that little bit of time at Shadow Mountain. It was very successful. Yeah. I think he's also taken over Hillcrest in Arizona. Both those schools in Arizona, by the way, if you did not know. He led Shadow Mountain to 5 state titles during his time there. An interesting little tidbit, too. When he took over the head coaching job, he wasn't accredited. So he was coaching as an assistant, but de facto head coach. So that was a little interesting tidbit that I learned about that. But, yeah, I don't know how well high school coaching experience is going to translate up to the big leagues of Division I college basketball. Of course, not a P5 school or anything like that, but getting into the Big Sky. And then just how this partnership's going to go, because I feel like both Bibby and Sac State are going to be looking for it in different ways. I feel like Bibby's going to use it as kind of like a springboard to try to get up to those Power 5 schools and a better job. Whereas I feel like Sac State is looking to kind of solidify that Pac-12 bid. And, they've got the new basketball arena, the new football arena, stadium. They've got all that NIL money that they've had pledged to them. So I feel like it's just another name that kind of like is trying to entice the Pac-12 to like, hey, give us that invite. I don't know how it's going to work, as both sides might be trying to go their own separate direction after a year or two.
Yeah, I'm curious about that. That you bringing up the Pac-12 is a very good point, because my thing is most of these coaches that start off at a school like Sacramento State, especially Mike Bibby, your name alone carries a lot of weight. Your coaching skills and your coaching tree where you come from may not carry as much weight early into his coaching career, but just his name is going to get him in front of the door for a lot of different jobs. But if Sacramento State was to make that transition to get to the Pac-12, it does help when you have big names and you have big players maybe going there now. And he has a lot of ties to Arizona, which always is pushing out talent for basketball. Maybe those guys now want to go to Sacramento State because Mike Bibby is there. So it is a little bit of a splash hire. I think Sacramento State, though, has been kind of doing that the whole offseason, if you look at their football team, too. Just how many transfers immediately went to Sacramento State once they had their hiring of their coach. I think the same thing can happen here with Mike Bibby. You also mentioned Sacramento. He was a kind of a Sacramento Kings legend when he played in the NBA. So it does make sense. But I think that's the best argument about this whole thing is if they're trying to get to the Pac-12, having a coach who kind of made his name in the Pac-12 back in Arizona, it all makes sense. And so will it work out? We don't know. But I think his name alone will get Sacramento State a lot more talent than they probably had in recent times. So we'll see how that goes. I'm not too mad at the hire, though.
Yeah, and like you kind of mentioned with getting those names, we saw it with the football program. They got the Tulane transfer at quarterback in, and it should lift them up from the bottom of the Big Sky where they were this year. Yeah. So I think in regards to that, I do think it's a good hire. I think as long as his coaching skill can develop these players still, that Sacramento State should come into play once again in the Big Sky for basketball, at least in those that mid-tier range, and not be looking at a 7 through 10 seed when it comes to the Big Sky tournament. They should be moving up to 3 through 6 at the very minimum.
Yeah, and I'm also curious to see. I think a big part when you're taking on a new job, when you're transitioning from high school to D1 college level, is who do you hire around you? You hire guys that have more experience than you, someone who can kind of, even though you have the title as head coach, you have a lot of coaching people around you that can kind of elevate you in your own way. So I'm curious to see how the rest of the staff shapes out. I think that'll be a more of a determining factor than just the name itself. But yeah, I think it's if you're a Sacramento State Hornets fan, you got to be happy with what's going on with your school. I feel like you've had kind of bottom of the barrel in a lot of sports the last couple of years, and it seems like the efforts by the university are doing a lot to get the program back on track. So got to be excited for them. Kind of the flip side of things, NAU, just on the women's side, seems like they were the last couple of years back-to-back 25-win season, had a great year this year, was one game away from making it to the tournament until Montana upset, or 2 games away because Montana upset them early. But they lose their head coach, too, to Santa Clara. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, of course, a disappointing end this year, but I'm not sure exactly in the landscape of women's basketball where going from NAU to Santa Clara ranks in terms of a jump as a coach.
Yeah,
you know,
fair.
You like to see people moving upwards, and with what Lori Payne has done, taking Northern Arizona from essentially where kind of that Sac State spot was, you know, the year before I think Lori Payne took over, they won 9 games. Mm-hmm. So, and the first couple of years weren't exactly, you know, a barn burner or anything for the team, but she's taken them to 3 of the last 4 Big Sky Conference championship games. This year, they were looking for a 4th straight. Montana ended that one just 1 round early, but, you know, it's a big loss for them. Mm-hmm. I know we kind of talked about this too with the transfer portal opening up. The women's side, maybe not as much as the men's side, and we'll get into that later. But what players are going to move? Is anybody going to follow? You know, you said Sophie Glancy has a year left of eligibility. Is she going to make that move over to the WCC? Because as a conference, I think the WCC is a step up.
Yeah.
I just don't know where exactly Santa Clara ranks coming off of a 14-18 season. Mm-hmm. So, you know, it's just kind of what do these players see as a jump? What do they think they're going to be able to do in Santa Clara versus staying and getting their degrees at Northern Arizona as well? Yeah, you know, got to take the school aspect of it as well.
Yeah, no, I think it's a really good point that you bring up, because when you look at the in the case of Mike Bibby, it's almost like a catastrophic jump. You know, it's like, man, he's going from high school straight to D1 college, never had any coaching experience in college. But with Payne, it's like it is moving into a tougher conference. That's without a doubt. But she has elevated that program every year she's been there. I think you said she started out with a 7-win season. I think in the next season they were 9. Then they got to 13. Then it was 17, and then back-to-back 25-win seasons. We will talk about this in the transfer portal. I am curious to see if Glancy does go with her. She was a huge part. The 2 years when Glancy was the main focus of that team were their 2 best years that they had. So I'm curious to see if she goes with them, because then that NAU program might have a lot of rebuilding to do. But it is Glancy's last year, going into her senior year, so maybe she does want to stay and finish out her career as a Lumberjack. So I'm curious to see about that. But, yeah, like you said, I think anytime you can get any sort of movement in college, it's something it's like a no-brainer. You have to go with it. So let's move on to the transfer portal now. It just opened up a couple of days ago. There's already big names flying off the shelf in the Big Sky. So out of the names, first of all, John, I know you took these notes down. So what are some of the big names that have entered the transfer portal?
Yeah, well, some of the names that have stuck out to me coming out of course, Langston Reynolds from Northern Colorado. The Bears, right on the edge of making the NCAA tournament to lose one of their key pieces there. Reynolds and Hawthorne were, great throughout the whole season. So losing him's big. For Montana, on the flip side, going to the NCAA tournament, you lose Malik Moore, who was, pretty sure a mainstay through that starting lineup throughout the season. I know they kind of flipped around the lineups at some point.
Yeah, him and Money switched from time to time.
Yeah, then you look at Eastern Washington, may not have been their best year, but Mason Williams going into the transfer portal, he was always a solid starter for the Eagles. Julius Mims, a preseason Big Sky player, all Big Sky player this last year out of Billings as well from Idaho. Brandon Walker from Montana State. Yes. And then today, recording this on the Tuesday, Carson Tout just jumped in. So, and who knows who will come in between the time that this comes out. So, there's a lot of big names already in there. I wanted to ask you, kind of after hearing those names, who else do you think might join?
I think the name is it's. I feel like I've said this guy's name more than any other player I've talked about. But my man Dylan Darling, I feel like he is a prime candidate. He already transferred to Idaho State from Washington State. You gave me that information earlier. I think with him arguably being considered one of the best players, if not the best, in my opinion, definitely the best point guard in the Big Sky, he's going to get offers. He still has 2 years of eligibility left. I think it's a no-brainer for him to transfer. I think with them losing players like Jake O'Neal, Idaho State might be in a rebuilding year if he doesn't return for sure. But I think he might go. Another player that his name I butchered before, but the sophomore from Weber State from Finland. First name is Viljamin. I'm not even going to try to pronounce his last name.
Viljarmi Vartiainen.
Yeah, whatever he said. So we'll go with that. I've kind of talked about him earlier this season, how he's such a prolific three-point shooter. He's going to be a name that's hot. Weber State also has another freshman. Last name is Henning, I believe. Matt Henning, I believe his name.
Trevor
Henning. He's a freshman. I feel like he might be another prime candidate. And then I do think I'm curious to see. I think Money Williams played well enough where he would be a hot name if he did enter the transfer portal. But with the Grizz losing so many seniors, he would have a really good opportunity to be the main focus of that whole team. And I'm curious if that's something that is appealing to him. We know about how much offseason hardships he's had. Maybe he does need a fresh start. I don't think we can knock him for any of that. But maybe after everything he's been through, he has a home tie to Montana now. So I'm curious to see what his thoughts are on that. But I think those are kind of the 3 or 4 names that pop up in my head that are like, these might be names you have to watch out for as well.
Yeah, and one of the things, too, with it, and I saw this with Brandon Walker, and one of the quotes that came out about it is the NIL deal. Brandon Walker said that he was offered, we don't know exactly where to yet, but he was offered a life-changing sum of money with an NIL deal. So that's just kind of the way that it goes now in basketball. And with somebody like Money Williams, who you're mentioning, you're not sure, with him throughout the season kind of being right on that edge of mock draft boards as a second rounder, I could definitely see him trying to put his name out there into the transfer portal, maybe get into a situation like Dalton Knecht had, where he went from Northern Colorado up to Tennessee and into the first round and as a lottery pick to the Lakers. So, Money Williams has that ability according to a lot of scouts out there, and he's shown it on the court with how he played. He dropped 30 against Tennessee, the former Dalton Knecht school, and 36 against Portland State there at the end of the season, with 33 coming in the second half. So, he's got the ability to go out there and play really well. And I think that games like that are kind of what kind of set you apart. And you can draw those highlight tapes. And especially when you do it against a school like Tennessee, it gets your name out there, and they've seen you do it in person. That can kind of open the recruiting, Another player, maybe not in the Big Sky, but maybe some people have heard of over in North Dakota, Trayson Eaglestaff is another one. He went out. They hosted Alabama this year, and he went out and scored 40-plus points in that game. And then the Summit League tournament, he scored 51. So he's definitely put his name out there too. And a lot of people think, just because he did it against Alabama, that Nate Oates is going to come calling. So you do it against Tennessee, like Money Williams did, Rick Barnes might pick up the phone and give you a little call here this offseason.
Yeah, it's crazy, the transfer portal now. I don't know when they're going to put a stop to it. I know NIL, I do support NIL. I do think these college players should be paid at their worth, all the money they bring into the schools. But the transfer portal, it seems like they made all these changes when COVID happened, and then they've just kind of been letting them ride out ever since. And we're quite a few years removed from that situation. They need to have stricter restrictions on it, in my opinion. I feel like it's just getting too out of control. Like, one of the things that this has nothing to do with Big Sky, but Scottie Pippen Jr.'s son, he mentioned his name is all on the news that he's entering the transfer portal. And Michigan's in the Sweet 16. It's like, are you focused on helping your team at all, or are you already focused on your next move? And it's just a little weird to see. But the transfer portal is going to play a huge part. I do think one positive from it, though, is if you have, in Montana's case, you have a lot of seniors moving on, you can rebuild your team pretty quickly with that.
Oh, definitely. That's how the Grizz built this team this year. They took in from the transfer portal. I mean, you look at Austin Patterson came from Sacramento State. Kai Johnson came from Division II at Western Washington. So they built this team through the transfer portal. They can do it again. It was interesting to see Montana was the most experienced team in college basketball this year with terms of games played. And you look at their rival in Montana State, they both had a lot of seniors, but they did it through different ways.
Yeah.
Montana drew in from the transfer portal while Montana State built their team through, players that maybe didn't get the playing time because they were sitting behind other players, and now they got their chance to start. So, yeah, it's interesting. And you talked about just how crazy the transfer portal's gotten in less than a day. It took the first 14 hours of the transfer portal opening. There were over 700 players who entered. That's enough for 50 14-man rosters.
Yeah.
That's a seventh of Division I.
Yeah.
In the transfer portal. So, and give some love to the women. We're talking a lot about the men's players here. It's because there's not any Big Sky women in the transfer portal at this moment that we know of. The transfer portal for the women's side is not as active as the men's side, to put it simply.
Yeah, and we'll see about that too. I know that the news of Payne just taking that job just happened. I'm really curious to see if Glancy follows her to Santa Clara. But she played so well that maybe she enters the transfer portal and maybe she gets a better upgrade than what her coach is doing. We're curious to see. We'll hopefully have some more news on that in the next coming week for you guys. It's a lot to follow, like he said, 700 players. So we're doing our best to keep an eye on it. And we'll find out more as the tournament goes on, as the season gets closer to an end. But moving on now to the actual games, the tournament, kind of some disappointing outlooks if you're a Big Sky fan. Montana, we're going to start with that game against Wisconsin. And Montana State, kind of the same thing. In that first half, looking like, all right, these teams can compete. These teams are right there. And then the second half, it was just a completely different story. So let's start with that Montana-Wisconsin game. Montana, like I said, was keeping it close in the first half. It seemed kind of towards the end of the end of the first half, and then the start of the second half. That's kind of when Wisconsin started pulling away. I know we talked about it before, but there was some foul trouble going on for the Grizz. What are other factors against this matchup with the Badgers that you think went wrong for the Grizz in this game? Yeah,
you kind of mentioned that the start of the second half. I was actually under a little bit of a different guise than you with that. I felt like Montana came out of the half really well.
Yeah.
They started off they got the deficit back down to 4 when it was 10 at the break. And they looked like they were going to, give Wisconsin a run for their money. And then the biggest thing is, in my opinion, you could tell that Wisconsin played in the Big Ten and has gone through the gauntlet all season. It's like those SEC teams this year. They looked like they've been through it. They know that this game isn't going to be anything where they can let up. And Montana bringing it closer could also reinvigorate that spark. Whereas, if Montana maybe was down 12 or 14 at that, Wisconsin may have tried to take their foot off the gas a little bit. But Montana getting that run, you have a second-team All-American with John Tonji. You've got the interior presence that I know you're going to talk about here pretty soon. So it just looked like the conditioning and the gauntlet schedule that Wisconsin had played prepared them very well for this game. And in general in this tournament, Cinderella never showed up. McNeese State had their moment with Will Wade leading them and all that stuff, but they fell in the second round to Purdue. There was no 11 seed that made it past the second round to the second weekend. And that hasn't happened since 2007. There was no 1, 2, 3, or 4 team seed upset. That was the first time since 2017, second time since 2007. So it was a very chalky tournament, and the big teams came out and put their foot down. And, I think Montana actually played better than a lot of those lower seeds did. So I think it's not a situation of Montana should hold their head down because, they lost by 19 or 18. They really should be proud of that performance and showed that for a good 30 minutes of the game, they held in with a Big Ten school.
Yeah, I think with me, when I talk about the end of the first half and then the second half, to me, it's like I wasn't looking at the score as much. I was looking at the body language and the game. Like you mentioned, they cut the lead to 4. I felt like it wasn't like it. At no point in that second half, I was like, this is when Montana's going to make a comeback. I just felt like it was a matter of time till Wisconsin started doing what they normally do. The thing, like you talked about the interior, Wisconsin's bigs. They got one guy 6'11", one guy 7 foot. They were 12 of 16 from the field combined. One guy had 10 boards, the other guy had 7 boards. They were getting it done. A lot of the times I saw Joe Pridgeon lined up against those guys. Pridgeon is strong as crap, but he's 6'5". Like, those guys are just getting easy shots because they're just shooting right over. And I had mentioned John Tanji before. He kind of had a pedestrian game as far as his level goes. He's capable of dropping 30. I think he finished with 17. He had a good game, very efficient. But to me, it was about how hard Montana had to work to get their offense going, and then the buckets that Wisconsin was getting. Like John Blackwell, the point guard for the Badgers, seemed like he was just getting right to his spots, and he was either shooting it or dropping it off to the bigs for easy buckets. And then Montana, it seemed like a lot of their shot attempts were as the shot clock were winding down. They couldn't get a good look. And regardless of what the stats say, I think Pridgeon was their best player. I was super impressed by him. He definitely I feel like he showed up with what he had to do on the defensive end and what he was doing on the offensive end, kind of being the big. Sawyer had a good game, too, for Montana. He is one of their only bigs at 6'8", but a lot of his shots came from outside the paint. I feel like Pridgeon was playing more inside. And then, I just feel like the one thing that was kind of shocking to me, too, is Money Williams. I believe he had no points in the first half. He finished with 8 in the game. I believe the reason why he comes off the bench is to provide a spark. I think he's enough of a talented player where he should be in the starting lineup, but the reason why he comes off the bench is so he can light that second unit up. And for him to come out in that first half and kind of not give him anything, I feel like that to me was when I kind of knew this game's going to be over unless he has a crazy second half, which he's capable of doing, but that never came. And I feel like that to me was like between that and the size was the biggest difference in the game.
Definitely, yeah. And you talk about Pridgeon being the best player on the court. You felt like
For the Grizz.
Well, yeah. For Montana, I should say.
Yeah.
But I could kind of see that, too, with just how physical he was going up against those bigs, too, defensively. And that's essentially what got him into foul trouble, though, too, is that physicality. And that's just kind of how he plays. But you have a difficult situation when you've got 2 6'10", 7-foot guys down inside the paint, and you're that defensive presence down in the paint as well. So, getting him to 4 fouls early in the second half wasn't good. A name you didn't mention that I thought played really well also was Kai Johnson. And
he's super efficient,
he was one of the more effective outside presences for Montana in that game. He, too, got into foul trouble. So, when your offensive production isn't able to be on the court because you're worried that they're not going to be, they're going to disqualify themselves with a foul out, it puts you behind the 8 ball as well. So,
and that's when you need Money Williams to step up.
Yep, Money Williams, Brandon Whitney, who did well. He got into the paint a few times and was able to finish at the rim. Malik Moore as well, like we mentioned him in the transfer portal now. Austin Patterson. This team had the ability.
Yeah, we talked about it was going to come down to guards, and it was wrong. It came down to the size because you got the foul trouble, you got and then how effective the bigs are. It came down to the size.
It's the sheer lack of size that Montana had.
It didn't really come down to the shooting. I thought Montana shot the ball well. I thought they had good looks at times on offense. It just you could tell that they were working a lot harder to get those shots than Wisconsin was.
Yep, and the drought for the Big Sky goes on. 2006 was the last time they won a game in the tournament. That was Montana when they upset Nevada, I believe. So
we got to move on now to the women's side of the bracket. Montana State. I was this is the difference between the Montana game and the Montana State game. I watched the Montana State game from tip-off, and the way that Montana State was hanging, I was kind of, drinking the Kool-Aid. I was like, this team can compete with Ohio State. I think at one point they were up 27-3. Ohio State's coach gets a technical, and from that moment on, the game just completely changed. I think Ohio State ended up going on like a 7 or 8-0 run, which is not a major run or anything like that. But then it carried on into the second half, and they just kept building and kept building. What are your thoughts on this game? What went wrong for the women Bobcats?
Yeah, well, like you said, Montana State took that 27-23 lead as Pinkton got to the hoop. She scored all 10 points for Montana State in the second quarter.
Yeah,
and
not a good sign.
We've talked about how Montana State's defense is able to just shut teams down. Ohio State's defense did that to them. And I think that was one of the questions that we've had for this Montana State team all season is how would they react in a game where their offense does get shut down?
Yeah.
And today on Friday we ended up seeing that Ohio State ended up being 30-3.
Exactly.
So over the 10 minutes. So
after a 4-point lead.
Yeah.
So you kind of feel like you got the momentum, and then nope.
It went from 27-23 to 53-30. So, yeah, and it's a difficult situation. But, yeah, I mean, I know you watched this game from start to finish, so I wanted to ask what you thought was the biggest issue that Montana State had in this game.
I think it was the pressure because they started getting a lot of turnovers in the backcourt, which I think that's the biggest thing. When you turn the ball over and you're doing your half-court offense, that happens. You don't run the right set. You don't make the right read. But when you're struggling to get the ball past half-court, it's really demoralizing. It just kind of feels like you can't even get into your sets. And the thing is, too, is I feel like Ohio State was playing such good defense that even when they got into their sets, they still weren't getting good looks. If you look at the actual percentage, I feel like Montana State shot around 40%. They've shot 40% in numerous games throughout the season. That's not a big thing. But it was like Morales, for example, she had a great game. She was 5 of 7. She only had 7 attempts because they're not getting into their half-court ascents. Caitlin Martin had 2 points. She was 1 for 1. So they're not getting into their sets. They're not able to run their offense. That's the biggest thing, and it's just demoralizing when you can't even get into running into your offense. So I know Benford was probably frustrated by that because I do believe she's a great coach and had a good game plan, but Ohio State just turned up that intensity, and then there was no coming back. And then something that we've mentioned all throughout this season is rebounding. They were out-rebounded yet again, and Ohio State did shoot 50% from the field, so a lot less rebounds to be had. But it was another thing where they weren't able to rebound the ball in the times that they needed to. But we could talk about the stats and what went wrong. It was the run. It was a 30-3 run. That's going to kill any team out of their chances.
Definitely, yeah. And I kind of just want to, reinforce what you were saying with the offense and everything. And that's just kind of where the struggles were. Mm-hmm. Defensively, they held Ohio State 8 points under their season average. So defensively, they still showed up and did what they do. They limit teams to lower than what they're going to do. They only allowed 71 points to a team that's averaged close to 80. Mm-hmm. So, defensively, they came out there and they stuck it to them, especially early, 17-17 after one. They took that lead midway through the second. So they definitely had what it takes. It came down to Ohio State, and sometimes when a coach gets a technical, it really riles up the team and makes them play really good. Mm-hmm. You've seen that a lot of times especially in the second half, how a team can close on such a run just because their coach gets fired up and it gets a technical and something lights a fire underneath the players and they get going. Another thing, though, that I wanted to bring up with this one, I'm going to kind of rant a little bit about it, but why are we still playing games in the first and second rounds for the women's tournament on the home floor of the higher seed? I understand the reasoning behind it of, it saves money. It's cost efficient to make sure that these teams don't have that ability. And I know that in a lot of other sports as well, you are playing your regionals in baseball and softball at a home site and even the super regionals in that regard. But with how the men's tournament is and going to neutral sites and playing those first and second round games and how much the women's tournament has grown in these past few years, when is it going to be time for them to go to these neutral sites? And the fact that we're playing on a home court of a team, Ohio State's playing in their home arena, it makes it that much more difficult for an upset to happen. And if you look at the stats, there have only been 7 times in the history of the women's tournament since it went to 64 teams that they've actually had a 13 seed upset a 4 seed. 8 times total that a 13 through 16 seed has. A 14 seed and a 15 seed have never won in the first round. Mm-hmm. A 16 seed did it back in the 90s when Harvard upset Stanford, and that was just absolutely incredible before even any of the men's team 16 seeds had to pull the upset. So when are we going to get to that point where we're playing at neutral sites and maybe opening up the door for some of these upsets?
Yeah, I think the time is soon because there's a lot of things that Stephen A. says that I don't agree with, but he did say that if it keeps going this way where the Power 5 conferences, both on the men's and women's side, keep winning, you lose that magic of college basketball. You lose that the magic of March Madness because you're not getting those upsets that you normally do. The upsets are always the best part about this tournament. But the women's game, in general, it's growing at levels that we've never seen. I honestly think if they're smart about it, they could potentially make more money off of it by hosting these things at neutral sites than they do by having the top seeds host their own games, because then you're just getting those home fans there and then the loyal fans that travel. If you're doing it like the men's side do, where you say, hey, you get a ticket to this game, you get to watch 2-3 games, you're going to make more money doing it that way. So I feel like if it's a money issue, you have an opportunity to like level the playing field. But I feel like that's the main thing you have to do is level the playing field. Well, and that's probably why your women's bracket is doing so well. I'm just kidding. But we're going to talk about that because John's doing really great on the women's side. But, yeah, it's just because in the women's side there's not much surprises, because a 1 seed like a South Carolina team, they're not going to lose to a 16 seed. UConn beat their team by, 69 points, the 16 seed they faced, and they're at home doing that. It's like, how much more unfair do we want to make it for the women's seeds that are really trying to like shock? Like it's can be considered a shock that South Dakota State beat Oklahoma State, because of what they had going against it. And we both picked that. That was a great pick on our end. But yeah, it's like a 10 seed beating a 7 seed shouldn't be the best like thing that happened in the tournament. So I'm curious to see when that changes.
Exactly. And home court advantages are going to still be a thing. You're going to have sites, and the higher seeds are going to get placed closer, because that's how they do it on the men's side too. Duke played in Raleigh. That's 20 minutes away.
Yeah.
A 20-minute drive. That's a home game. I'm sorry. I know it's at their rivals' arena in NC State, but that's still a home game for Duke.
Yeah.
They're going to get.
But then you have some schools
more.
that are traveling to Spokane or Seattle, and they're East Coast teams, like Maryland. Maryland is playing in Seattle. It's like, why?
Exactly.
Why is Duke you can travel 30 minutes and Maryland has to travel across country?
That's just it. The higher seeds get their choice, and
Yeah.
Maryland's a 4 seed, so they're the highest seed remaining at that point.
Yeah.
But if they were a 3 seed or a 2 seed, even you might be able to go closer to home. But there's not as many teams on the West Coast, of course, so that's going to be difficult in general. But so that's why Maryland ends up in Seattle, is because they're the last team to get a choice.
Yeah.
So they just get thrown wherever. So, but I mean, you're going to get that on the women's side too. But why do we have to do it on their home court? Why can't Ohio State be in Dayton? Dayton's a great site that is a history of hosting NCAA tournament games. Regardless, it doesn't have to be a big city. I'm not saying we have to go to the meccas of arenas for women's basketball, but I do think that we just need to find a neutral site to host and the ability for these teams to have a chance.
Yeah.
And you split up the court, and you're selling tickets to impartial fans at times. And, especially now, I like how they do this, the regional setup now. I don't think you need 4 regions. I think that they have a great setup now with the 2 in Spokane, 2 in Birmingham this year. So it allows fans to get more basketball with that too. And I'm not saying that, only 4 sites for the first and second rounds. You probably do still need 8 to be able to play it in that time frame. But it beats. There's something about that atmosphere too, and it just beats having to play it on your home court.
Yeah. No, I agree. So we have to move on now to the 2 teams that were not in the big tournaments but still had some tournament action going on. We'll start with the NAU women's side. They took care of business against Arizona. We kind of thought they would. It ended up being a lot closer of a game. And then we're going to jump right into the second game as well, to kind of sum these both up. They had another game against Belmont where they lost by just 1 point. That game stood out to me a lot. I'll tell you that in a little bit. But how do you feel about how NAU closed out their season in those final 2 games, and then obviously, factor that in with them losing their coach?
Yeah, I think it's a double whammy. In terms of that, they led by 21 against Belmont on the road, and they lost on a last-second layup.
Yeah.
So not only did they blow the lead, but then they get their hearts broken at the buzzer.
Yep.
And then on top of that, 2 days later, you lose your coach. We talked about whether or not we think these players are going to jump in the transfer portal. They're probably still gathering their thoughts after the way their season ended. You're on a high. You're up 41-20 in the first half, and all of a sudden it's 81-80, and you're going home. So this NAU team definitely, they've shown this year what their resolve is and how they play, and I don't think that's a fair way for them to go out. I know it's difficult because it's tournament play, and you can say that for every team. But, yeah, it's such a heartbreaking way to go out as a team, and then to lose your coach on top of it. It's just a difficult situation.
Yeah, the Arizona game I'm not going to touch on so much because it was such a long time ago. We did think they were going to win it, and they played great in that game. They had good performances from Glancy, and other players stepped up in that game as well. Her name is escaping me right now, the other forward. But that Belmont game is one that stood out to me way more, not only because they lost just by 1 point, but they got outscored 32-15 in the fourth quarter. They finished the game with 20 turnovers, and Belmont got to the free throw line 34 times. NAU got to the free throw line 4 times. It's just like you just look at those 3 stats, or you could take away the fourth quarter stat, but like when you look at that, like you should expect that team to get blown out. If you turn the ball over 20 times, you only shoot 4 free throw attempts compared to a team shooting 30 more free throw attempts than you. Granted, Belmont didn't shoot great from the free throw line, but I still think they outscored them by 16 just from the free throw line. So it's just like I didn't get to see that game. I really want to know what went wrong in that fourth quarter. I don't know if they were just turning the ball over at a crazy rate, but giving up 32 points in a fourth quarter women's game to me seems like a lot. So I don't know exactly what all went wrong in that fourth quarter, but I do think that played a factor into it. So just really tough loss to end their year, because you get that big win against a Power 5 school in Arizona. You're up by 21, like you said, and then that happens. And I'm curious to know, you don't ever want to speculate, but maybe there are already murmurs going on of her getting ready to leave. Maybe they weren't that motivated to win that game. But I think when you have a 21-point lead, you are motivated to win. It's just something along the lines went wrong.
Yeah, and when you get into that situation, too, you'd think maybe that they'd be more likely to lose in that first round to Arizona if there are those murmurs going on. So I don't really think that has anything to play. And I'd love to go back and watch it and just see how many of those turnovers came, A, in that fourth quarter, and B, just in the second half overall, where they start to see that lead evaporate. So what changed in Belmont's defense and how that affected them, and just maybe what didn't change on the Northern Arizona offense and how they tried to break the press.
Yeah, and like you said, you don't want to speculate, but NAU was on the road again, and the home team shoots 30 more free throws. How many of those are home calls? How many of those are actual legit calls? I didn't watch the game, so don't come at me. I'm not saying that it was all called in Belmont's favor, but a 30 differential from the free throw line is wild. I don't know if I ever seen something that big of a gap. So we don't know. But moving on to the other team who was in the NIT, the Northern Colorado Bears, they lost their first game against UC Irvine. I kind of talked about in last week's podcast. Bent Luke in their big 7-footer. I thought he was going to be a problem for Northern Colorado. He was 17-10. So he did exactly what I thought he was going to do. What are your thoughts? What happened with this game for the Bears?
Yeah, the bigs inside were just the issue. You talked about Luke, and then Devin Tillis had 24 and 7, 6'6" forward for Irvine. I really like this Irvine team, though, in general. Yeah, and having watched them through some of the Big West this season, I really think that they have a chance to win this NIT. Mm-hmm. So I feel like this was a good result for Northern Colorado, and the fact that they led for a good portion of that second half and through the middle portion of the game is a good sign for them. Of course, it's the end of the year, and you don't want to go out with a loss, but I don't think that they should be hanging their heads at all, kind of like how Montana we talked about. They put up a big fight, and the difference in this game, and I wanted to mention this too with the NAU game. The NAU women finished that game with just 6 points over the last 6 minutes. Northern Colorado finished with just 12 points over the last 12 minutes, 11 and a half minutes. So it's not exactly how you want to draw up an end of a game, especially when you have the lead. But, the good teams are going to do the inevitable and win. So,
yeah. All right, so the last topic we got to get into is kind of an update on our brackets. We're not going to get into what went wrong and what went right. So let's just kind of sum things up here, John. Looking at the men's side of things, we're now heading into the Sweet 16 with those games beginning on Thursday. So how's your Sweet 16 looking? What'd you get right? What'd you get wrong?
Let's just say the men's bracket is not one of my best in history. Looking at it, I had some very difficult first round games where, I picked Louisville to go to the Elite Eight, and they get raced out by Creighton. And UC San Diego loses a heartbreaker. I had them in the Sweet 16 as well. Overall, I think I ended up with 12 of my 16 correct. 4 misses, but not the worst in the world. And I still have my Final Four intact, which is very, very pleasing. I've had years in the past where, in Arizona, you're an ASU guy, so I'm going to hate on Arizona for a second to please you. They lost to Princeton in the first round one year and absolutely ruined my bracket. So very pleased to still have my Final Four and my championship matchup of Florida and Duke still alive.
Yeah, my Sweet 16 does not look good. I feel like I have in most of these matchups, I only have one of the teams right. And then St. John's losing to Arkansas, that kind of messed up my bracket because I had St. John's going to the Elite Eight. before they lose to Florida. The one thing I did get right is I had Ole Miss making it to the Sweet 16 as the 6th seed facing Michigan State, and that's worked out. On the other side, the only thing that noticed that I got wrong, and I watched this game, was Oregon lost to Arizona, and Oregon was in that game the whole time, had a really good shot to win it. But other than that, still have the championship alive. The Final Four is still alive, so I guess that's the only positive thing I could say about that. But there's a couple of games where I only have one team right. So we'll see what happens. As far as ESPN goes, I'm winning on the men's side by a couple of points, but on the women's side, John is absolutely crushing me. So let's talk about that.
Yeah, the women's side, I don't know what's gotten into me on this one, but I got the entire second round right. I missed 6 in the first round, and that's it. So all my Sweet 16s in there. I absolutely distraught that Juju Watkins got hurt last night in that game, but for my bracket, that opens up the UConn pick. I'm very disappointed that we're not going to get that Paige Beckers versus Juju Watkins matchup that we all deserve potentially in that Elite Eight. But yeah, overall, I'm still very confident in my UCLA pick and South Carolina on the other side of the bracket. And for the Sweet 16, can I just say that I'm very excited to watch Duke, North Carolina round 3.
Yeah, no, that one I had lined up the same as you. I had that one going on. I also had South Carolina, Maryland, I believe. No, Alabama beat Maryland. That was a game. Maryland beat them. So that was what I had wrong. I had Alabama beating Maryland, and that game went into triple overtime.
Yeah,
that was a great game. I guess the main thing I can say about mine is I'm not doing too terrible on this one, but the main thing is I picked USC to win it all with Juju Watkins tearing her ACL. There's no way. I don't think they get past. They can beat Kentucky, but I don't think there's any way they get past UConn with no Juju. So.
Kiki played incredible last night.
Yeah, she's going to have to keep playing better. But yeah, I just think no Juju, and if it's just Kiki going, and USC has other good players. It's not just those two, but UConn has such a balanced team. You take away a star player like Juju, it's going to be a lot easier for them to focus and take Kiki out of it.
We're talking about Paige Beckers a lot, and AZ Fudd just absolutely went off in the second round against South Dakota State, and she also went ham against Arkansas State in that first round, and they won by 69 points.
Yeah.
So I just think UConn's going to be too much for them at this point. I think they were going to be too much for them even with Juju right now.
Yeah.
I think UConn, honestly, if anyone's going to beat UCLA, I really do think UConn is playing like the team that would do it. So, if you're in the Spokane area this coming weekend, you got some good women's basketball games coming your way.
Yeah, I did want to touch on that real quick. Some of these Sweet 16 matchups on the women's side are going to be great. We got LSU, NC State. That's going to be a great game. And then, like you mentioned, North Carolina, Duke. One of the games that's kind of a sleeper pick that I'm really looking forward to is TCU versus Notre Dame.
Yeah. That's
going to be a great game. I'm really excited to see Hidalgo go against Van Lith. Van Lith is someone who I've been rooting for a while. So I'm hoping that that game does not disappoint. And I'm hoping USC shows some fight and surprises some people. But I still think it'll be a great matchup with UConn. But yeah, just terrible news for Juju. So
yeah, absolutely.
All right. Well, any other final thoughts for us?
No. I think it's all good. I think we're both in a good situation with our brackets, though, despite what ESPN tells us with our rankings being back in the millions of people.
Yeah.
So
all it takes is one good round.
Exactly.
But yeah, that's going to wrap up this episode of the Big Sky Now Basketball Podcast. Join us for our next episode when we have that ready for you. We'll try to keep you updated on these coaching changes and the transfer portal as best we can as soon as that news comes out. So look forward to that next episode that it drops, and we will be restarting the Big Sky football soon as Montana's getting ready to play their spring game next month. So look forward to the Big Sky podcast continuing going on, whether it's basketball or football. We'll keep things going. Me and John will be there like always. Thank you to our sponsor, Corwin Motors, for sponsoring this episode. And yeah, that's a wrap for us this week. Good luck to the rest of the people out there in their brackets. Hopefully they're doing better than us, but you're probably not doing better than John in the women's side. So, but yeah, until the next episode of Big Sky Now, take care. Thanks to Corwin Motors for sponsoring the Keeping Score podcast. At Corwin Motors, they're proud to be family driven for over 100 years. Their commitment goes beyond selling cars. They're dedicated to serving our community and providing you with the highest quality vehicles to fit your lifestyle. Whether you're searching for reliability, style, or comfort, they got you covered. They understand that you rely on their website for accurate and up-to-date information, and it's their promise to deliver relevant, detailed content that meets your needs. So if you're in the market for a new Chevrolet or just want to learn more, visit CorwinMotorsKalispell.com.